Okay, we missed class yesterday, so we're going to try to rush through and see how much we can get done today for philosophy of mind. We're still in the intro section to get rid of these just sort of background things, which are not really just background things. They're super important, but that's the way they're being treated in this collection. So we're just going to push through. We did Plato, we did Aristotle, and had a lot of fun with that. We're going to do Descartes. So there's going to be an excerpt here, I think, probably from the second meditation. So Descartes remembered as a philosopher. We talk a lot about Descartes in year two, so I'm just going to do a brief intro here. Most people think of Descartes as a philosopher, but almost all of his intellectual and academic work was in the fields of science. He wrote one small philosophical text, which was earth-shattering and amazing, and some people think he wrote it just to sort of underpin and justify doing all this science stuff, and some people have pointed out that maybe he was doing it because he was trying to overthrow the Aristotelian way of thinking about physics, and he wanted to have a whole new science, and so he kinda needed a whole new philosophy underneath it. Um, there's another idea about this text, however, which doesn't contradict the first 2 that I've heard, which is that this is a mystical text. It is philosophy, but it's also designed to induce a religious experience inside the reader. We're not going to be reading all of it, and so we're not going to probably have that experience today if it's possible. But I do think there's really something to that. And so in the library section of the website, Descartes' meditations are both in the literature mysticism section and in the philosophy section. We won't go too much into that now. We'll just sort of leave that for other days. Let me make sure this light's on here, or else my old man eyes have trouble. Ah, there we go. There we go. That'll be fine. Okay, so let's get into it. Excerpts. Okay, so in this philosophical text, it's called the Meditations for a reason. And what he does is there's 6 of them, I think. And in the first one, he sets out his method. And his method is essentially this. Take all the categories, take 3 categories of things that you think. There are things that you know for sure are true. There are things that you think are likely true or might be true, but you're not really 100% sure. And then there are things that you know are false. And Descartes comes into the table with those 3 sets of beliefs on the table, and he just wipes out 2/3 of them. He just says, anything that I know is false, I'm going to drop on the ground. Anything that could possibly be false, I'm going to throw it on the ground. I don't want to deal with anything that's dubitable, anything that I can doubt. I'm going to build my whole philosophy on things that are not doubtable, that are indubitable. And so he sets out to design that method in the first meditation, and he discovers that there's very little that he can't doubt. He sort of gives free rein to his mind to ask all sorts of uncomfortable and unpleasant questions. And he discovers, you know, I think that there's a bottle here in front of me. I'm feeling it. I'm looking at it. I can taste it. But I've had dreams before when I was naked in my bed and there was no bottle near me, and I was dreaming that I was holding a bottle and tasting a bottle and touching a bottle and seeing a bottle. So I could be dreaming right now. I don't know that there's a bottle right in front of me right now. The tree out the window, I mean, I could be dreaming that. The whole physical world seems doubtable. I could be a brain in a vat. And then the idea hits him, well, what about 2 and 3 making 5? That's not really doubtable, and we're doing our a priori section, so this will go along well with that. What about the idea that 2 and 3 make 5? He goes, you might think that's not doubtable, but it is possible that there's a malevolent deity or an all-powerful demon that has created the world and makes me do my sums inaccurately, but makes me do them inaccurately the same every single time, so I never notice that I've done them inaccurately any of the times that I do them. Maybe every time I've added 2 and 3, I mistakenly got 5 when really it was 6 or 7, but I always get 5, and so I never notice that I'm mistaken here. So he finds that he can doubt an awful lot, and I believe this is probably the start of the second meditation. So now he's disoriented. He's floating around in a dark ocean. He doesn't know which way is up. He can't find anything solid. And here he goes. Yesterday's meditation has hurled me into doubts so great that I can neither ignore them nor think my way out of them. I am in turmoil, as if I have accidentally fallen into a whirlpool and can neither touch bottom nor swim to the safety of the surface. I will struggle, however, and try to follow the path that I started on yesterday. I will reject whatever is open to the slightest doubt, just as though I have found it to be entirely false. And I will continue until I find something certain, or at least until I know for certain that nothing is certain. You can tell he's trying to swim through to the other side. Good work. Archimedes required only one fixed and immovable point to move the whole earth from its place. I too can hope for great things if I can find even one small thing that is certain and unshakable. I will suppose then that everything I see is unreal. So he's going to imagine not only that it's doubtable, but he's going to say, well, what if the things I can doubt are actually false things? I'm going to deny their truth. So I'm going to start out by assuming that everything I see is unreal. I will believe that my memory is unreliable and that none of what is present of what it presents to me ever happened. I have no senses. Body, shape, extension, motion, and place are fantasies. What then is true? Perhaps only that nothing is certain. But how do I know that there isn't something different from the things just listed, which I do not have the slightest reason to doubt? Isn't there a God or something like one who puts my thoughts into me? Okay, good. So we're actually in the third meditation, not the second one, it seems. Okay, so or maybe not. Let's find out. Hey, you think he's going to doubt God? Okay, which puts my thoughts into me. But why should I say so when I may be the author of those thoughts? Well, isn't it at least the case that I am something? But I now am denying that I have senses and a body. But I stop here. For what follows from these denials? Am I so bound to my body and to my senses that I cannot exist without them? I have convinced myself that there is nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Doesn't it follow that I don't exist? No. Surely I must exist if it's me who is convinced of something. But there is a deceiver, supremely powerful and cunning, whose aim is to see that I am always deceived. But surely I exist if I am deceived. Let him deceive me all he can. He will never make it the case that I am nothing while I think that I am something. Thus, having fully weighed every consideration, I must finally conclude that the statement I exist, must be true whenever I state it or mentally consider it. So let's actually unfold for a moment, even though this is more of a second year thing that we happen to just have set some time apart to see the famous "I think, therefore I am," which he doesn't use in the original translation, but in in one of the translations, that phrase appears. Um, but in any event, what's he saying here? He's not claiming as much as people think, right? He's saying, "When I'm doubting. Do 2 and 3 make 5? I found a way to doubt it. Am I even a physical body? Are there even physical bodies?" All the things that David Hume was the only willing to affirm, he says, "All of those seem unreal to me," right? Those don't seem like they're real because I can doubt them. I'm a brain in a vat. I'm in a matrix. I'm being constantly deceived. There's no such thing as length, breadth, width, color, sensations of any type. I'm just numbers in a simulation. And he says, okay, well, that's not pleasant. Isn't there anything that I can't doubt? And what he says is, well, give me something to doubt. I'll doubt it. Anything I find, I can doubt it. How about the proposition I am doubting? Can I doubt the proposition that I am doubting? Right now, I'm doubting. But whenever I try to doubt the proposition that I am doubting, I have to doubt in order to do that. I must affirm that I am capable of doubting, which means that I am a thinking thing. So even if I don't have a body, I, as a thinking thing, which can be deceived, certainly exist every time I put forward that I doubt anything. Okay. So he's not even saying he knows he existed yesterday. He knows that right now, in this very moment that he's trying to doubt things, the proposition I am doubting cannot be doubted by him without affirming it. So every time he puts it forward, at least as a thinking thing that can be deceived, he knows he must exist. That's as much as he's proven. Now, remember, he's looking for the tiniest grain of sand of something solid that won't move, and then he's going to try to rebuild the entire world from that, right? Archimedes, give me a lever and a fixed point, and I can move the world. I'm strong enough to move the world. Why? Because he understood how levers work, right? Well, Descartes saying, just give me one thing, just one thing, and perhaps I can get the world back. So even though he can doubt everything else, even if he's a brain in a vat, even if he's deceived about everything, he as a thing that can be deceived must exist. That's how far he's gone. But I do not yet fully understand what this I is that must exist. I must guard against inadvertently taking myself to be something other than I am, thereby going wrong even in the knowledge that I put forward as supremely certain and evident. Hence, I will think once again, he's going right back to trying to knock things apart. I will think once again about what I believed myself to be before beginning these meditations. From this conception, I will subtract everything challenged by the reasons for doubt, which I produced earlier, until nothing remains except what is certain and indubitable. All right. So I exist as a thinking thing, but what does that mean and how much and when? Right. He doesn't want to add things to it unless there's certain things. What then did I formerly take myself to be? A man, of course. But what is a man? Should I say a rational animal? No, because then I would need to ask what an animal is and what it is to be rational. Thus, starting from a single question, I would sink into many, which are more difficult, and I do not have the time to waste on such subtleties. Instead, I will look here at the thoughts which occurred to me spontaneously and naturally when I reflected on what I was. The first thought to occur to me was that I have a face, hands, arms, and all the other equipment also found in corpses, which I call a body. The next thought to occur to me was that I take nourishment, move myself around, sense, and think, that I do things which I trace back to my soul. Either I didn't stop to think about what this soul was, or I imagined it to be a rarefied air or fire or ether permeating the denser parts of my body. But about physical objects, I didn't have any doubts whatsoever. I thought that I distinctly knew their nature. If I had tried to describe my conception of this nature, I might have said something like this. When I call something a physical object, I mean that it is capable of being bounded by a shape and limited to a place, that it can fill a space so as to exclude other objects from it, that it can be perceived by touch, sight, hearing, taste, and smell, that it can be moved in various ways, not by itself, but by something else in contact with it. I judged that the powers of self movement, to sensing, and of thinking did not belong to the nature of physical objects, bodies themselves, and in fact, I marveled that there were some physical objects in which these powers could be found. So that's what he used to think. He doesn't think he's proven any of that again. But what should I think now? While supposing that a supremely powerful and evil deceiver completely devotes himself to deceiving me, can I say that I have any of the things that I have attributed to the nature of physical objects? I concentrate, I think, I reconsider, but nothing comes to me. I grow tired of the pointless repetition. But what about the things that I have assigned to soul? Okay, so all of those things being sensible and tasteable and touchable, taking up length, breadth, and width, being in a location, right? He doesn't even think just because he knows he's a thing that can be deceived doesn't mean he's a thing in a location. Okay, he's really, if you want to talk with modern thinkers about AI and we're in a simulation, Descartes was there, baby. Descartes was like, this is how unreal you could be. You could be so unreal, and he's going to think, I don't see anything about myself as a deceivable thing. That means that I'm not just a program somewhere. I'm not even somewhere. There's no physical location. I don't take up length, breadth, and width. This is what he's really thinking through. He goes, I try to find something about my bodily qualities that I know must be true, and I can't find them. They could all just be fed into me through a deceiving message to the brain. Okay, so then he says, all right, forget the physical then. I don't know that stuff. What about this other stuff that I usually assign to the soul, nutrition and self movement? Since I have no body, these are merely illusions, right? I can't be eating to taking in nutrition if I don't even have a body that needs it, right? What about sensing? But I can't sense without my body. And in sleep, I've seemed to sense many things that I later realized that had not been sensed. Okay, so his definition of sensing is actually perceiving a thing. He goes, well, if I don't believe in bodies, external or even in myself, of myself, I don't believe in sensing. I mean, it's clearly I could be doubting that. I don't know that I'm a sensing thing. Okay. Thinking. What about thinking? It comes down to this. Thought and thought alone cannot be taken away from me. I am, I exist. That much is certain. But for how long? As long as I'm thinking. For it may be that if I completely stopped thinking, I would completely cease to exist. You notice David Hume's idea is not unfamiliar to him. He's aware of this whole train of thinking. All right. I am not now admitting anything unless it must be true. I am not, therefore, I am, and I am therefore not admitting that I am anything at all other than a thinking thing, that is, a mind, a soul, understanding, or reason, or something like that, terms whose meaning I did not previously know. I know that I am real. I am a real existing thing, but what kind of a thing? As I have said, a thing that thinks. I exist as a thing that thinks whenever I try to doubt that that's the case, because to do so, I must doubt, and to doubt, I must think. Okay, that's all he knows about himself so far. What else? I will draw up mental images. I'm not the recollection of organ. I'm sorry, I'm not the collection of organs called the human body. I have denied that I know that bodies are real. Nor am I rarefied gas permeating these organs, or air, or fire, or vapor, or breath, for I have supposed that none of these things exist. Still, I am something. But couldn't it be that these things, which I do not yet know about, and which I am therefore supposing to be non existent, really aren't distinct from the I that I know to exist? I don't know. And I'm not going to argue about it now. All right. So he's not even affirming that mind can be separate from body, right? Just because he's denying that he knows that there are bodies, don't think he's making the mistake of saying, so therefore the mind can exist without the body. He's still being doubtful of even that, right? If he can figure out how this thinking thing that's always being deceived perhaps must require a body, then he'll have a body back, right? It's not how he's going to get there, by the way. But he's suspending all affirmations of anything except what he can say for sure must be the case. And in his ability to construct modes of doubt, he's gotten to the idea that basically he's in the matrix as a program. He's not even a body plugged into a matrix. And that all of his sense perceptions, every bit of memory, all of that stuff is all just programmed in the last instant when he started this thinking thing. And perhaps it all goes off online the second he stops thinking. He doesn't know that that's the case, right? He's not saying, I know there is an all powerful demon deceiving me. He's not saying, I know for sure that two and three don't make five, right? He's not affirming the negation of these things. He's refusing to affirm anything that he doesn't know for sure. It's an impressive path he takes, and he does it very consistently. It's impressive. So let's watch. But could it be that these things, which I do not yet know about, and which I am supposing to be non-existent, really aren't distinct from the I that I know to exist? I don't know, and I'm not going to argue about it now. I can only form judgments on what I do know. I know that I exist, and I ask what this I, quote unquote, I is that I know to exist. It's obvious that this conception of myself doesn't depend on anything that I do not yet know to exist, and therefore that it does not depend on anything of which I can draw up a mental image. And the words draw up point to my mistake. I would truly be creative if I were to have a mental image of what I am, since to have a mental image is just to contemplate the shape or image of a physical object. I now know with certainty that I exist, and at the same time that all images, and more generally, all things associated with the nature of physical objects may just be dreams. When I keep this in mind, it seems just as absurd to say, I use mental images to help me understand what I am, as it would be to say, now while awake, I see something true, but since I don't yet see it clearly enough, I'll go to sleep and let my dreams present it to me more clearly and truly. Thus, I know that none of the things that I can comprehend with the aid of mental images bear on my knowledge of myself, and I must carefully draw my mind away from such things if it is to see its own nature distinctly. Holy shit. He has just taken away from himself. Let's be careful here. He has taken away the right to argue philosophically, right? He's basically calling other philosophers lazy in different ways. He's saying, if what you do is you say, well, there's this notion that we have, let's just start with that and see what it means. And does it make sense? It's very much going against the Aristotelian. Remember, we said Aristotle says, let's talk about ethics. How about courage? Where's a courageous man? There's one. Right? What makes him courageous? Let's talk it out and debate it. Descartes is saying, how can I go into talking about animals and rationality and all of these? I don't even know that I exist as a bodily thing yet, right? I'm doing this totally differently. I'm not going to allow myself to get there that way. And then here he says, what do you mean we're going to start with some concepts? Oh, well, the concept that we have of bodies and minds works like this. And so he goes, throw them out. Throw them out. You could be in the matrix. You could be a program with some things written into your programming to force you to think that way. You don't know that they're true. You have no reason to think they're true. So I'm going to so he's taking away that path for himself. He will soon utilize one of the ideas in his head and see that its nature is very different from other ideas, and by the nature of that idea he will come to another truth. So he's not saying, but he's saying, any ideas that I have, they could all just be sewn into me from the start. He's going as far as any simulation theorist is today, and he's not being dumb about it. Okay. But what then am I? A thinking thing. That's all I can affirm so far. What is that? Well, it's something that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and also senses and has mental images. That's what we normally think of as a thinking thing. You've got a lot of qualities as a thinking thing. But that's quite a lot if I really do all these things, but don't I? Isn't it me who now doubts nearly everything, understands one thing, affirms this thing, refuses to affirm other things, wants to know much more, refuses to be deceived, has mental images, sometimes involuntarily, and is aware of many things through his senses, quote unquote. Even if I am always dreaming, and even if my creator does what he can to deceive me, isn't it just as true that I do all these things as that I exist? Are any of these things distinct from my thought? Can any be said to be separate from me? That it's me who doubts, understands, wills, is so obvious that I don't see how it could be more evident. And it's also me who has mental images. While it may be, as I am supposing, that absolutely nothing of which I have a mental image really exists, the ability to have mental images really does exist and is a part of my thought. Finally, it's me who senses or who seems to gain awareness of physical objects through the senses, right? He's not saying there are physical objects. He's not saying he's ever sensed them. It's a distinction now between actually sensing something or having the qualia experience of sensing. That's the only bit he's affirming. All he's affirming is that as deceived as I am, I can't help the fact that I'm deceived into thinking I'm perceiving things quite often. And so I can have the mental side of a perception. That's just the mental side, right? He's not saying I have eyeballs that are receiving light. He's saying the vision is happening to me. That's going on. That's all I know. So he's gone from I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am, to, oh, I'm a thing that can do a lot of thinking things. It's already starting to expand. Well, it may be, as I am supposing that absolutely nothing of which I have a mental image really exists, the awareness of physical objects through the senses. For example, I am now seeing light, hearing a noise, and feeling heat. These things are unreal since I am dreaming, but it is still certain that I seem to see, to hear, and to feel. This seeming cannot be unreal, and it is what is properly called sensing. Strictly speaking, sensing is just thinking. Again, he's not saying I'm sensing things. He's saying I'm having the experience of sensing things, and that can't be doubted either. All of the thinking things I do, I can affirm now. From this, I begin to learn a little about what I am, but I still cannot stop thinking that I apprehend physical objects, which I picture in mental images and examine with my senses, much more distinctly than I know this unfamiliar I, of which I cannot form a mental image. To think this, even though it would be astounding if I comprehended things, which I've found to be doubtful, unknown, and alien to me, more distinct than the one which I know to be real myself. But I see what's happening. My mind enjoys wandering and it won't confine itself to the truth. I will therefore loosen the reins on my mind for now, so that later, when the time is right, I will be able to control it more easily. He's all right. So it almost sounded like he was going to make an argument there, right? He was going to say, I don't even know what this thing is that's doing this thinking, but I have very clear, distinct notions of what these objects are. So shouldn't they be more real? He goes, no, no. My mind wants to be deceived. My mind won't stick to the simple truth that I told it that for all you know, you're dreaming and this thing isn't real. So my mind is forcing me to think there are things, but I still won't affirm them. I still won't affirm them. I refuse to be deceived. I want certainty and I want to build on certainty alone. Holy shit. This is a meditation. You're supposed to go through. We're not going through it all. It's kind of horrible to read an excerpt from just one part of it. But when we do the whole thing in year two, we're going to spend quite some time on it. It is a meditation. You're supposed to go through this thought experiment, and he goes right through the Humean hell out through the other side. Let's see how he does it. Let's consider the things commonly taken to be the most distinctly comprehended physical objects that we see and touch. Let's not consider physical objects in general, since general conceptions are very often confused. Rather, let's consider one particular object. Take, for example, this piece of wax. It has just been taken from the honeycomb. It hasn't yet completely lost the taste of honey. It still smells of the flowers from which it was gathered. Its color, shape, and size are obvious. It is hard, cold, and easy to touch. It makes a sound when wrapped. In short, everything seems to be present in the wax that is required for me to know it as distinctly as possible. But as I speak, I move the wax towards the fire. It loses what was left of its taste. Ugh. It gives up its smell. It changes color. It loses its shape. It gets bigger. It melts. It heats up. It becomes difficult to touch. It no longer makes a sound when struck. Is it still the same piece of wax? We must say that it is. No one denies it or thinks otherwise. Then what was there in the wax that I comprehended so distinctly? Certainly nothing that I reached with my senses. For while everything having to do with taste, smell, sight, touch, and hearing has changed, the same piece of wax remains. What the fuck am I perceiving as a thing if I can change all of the way that it can communicate with me through the senses, and yet I still know it's the same thing? He's going to do some plagiarizing from Socrates here, but not, plagiarizing is saying the same thing someone else said, but not better. He's gonna put a nice package to it. Go ahead.
This is already levels above better than the other intros we've gone over.
Better than what?
The other excerpts we've gone over. I know this is just an excerpt.
Yeah.
Is extremely thought provoking.
I'm glad you're liking it. We're in year two. We're gonna do. They skipped the first meditation. We're gonna do all six. It's a death and rebirth. If you really do it, he will take your part of brain apart and put it back together. I mean, it's a wild ride, and you're supposed to do it as a meditation. And there's passages in there that point out that fact because there's a scholar in South America. We'll talk more about him and give him credit later I'll put some resources up. But he's down there now. I've met him once, and he pointed to a paragraph where Descartes proves the existence of God. before he proves that there are physical objects. He knows that he as a deceivable thing exists, and he knows that God exists before he knows anything else. And he does it in a very Socratic way. It's very powerful. But then after he's done with that, there's a paragraph that this scholar, and again, I apologize. We'll look him up and point to him later. But that this scholar says, look, this paragraph doesn't make any sense. It does not make sense that this would be in this book unless this is a work of mysticism. Because before he finishes that section, he says, before we move on to our next things to consider, let's see if we can bring bodies back and physical objects back again. Before we do that, now that we have clarified our ideas, gotten rid of the falsehoods, we can see directly the divine for real. Let's bask in the glory. Let's marvel in the fact that we can have a direct relationship with God right now because we've cleared away all of our confusion. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I thought you were making arguments. It's like, yeah, he is making arguments, just like Socrates was. He's making philosophical arguments about stuff, but it's also it's designed, like Socrates said, we're trying to relate to the arche, the source of all truth, being goodness, justice, and love. Descartes is sort of doing a Platonic thing here, and maybe pushing back and making some elbow room from the scholastic Aristotelian worshippers, which you can see him taking shots at Aristotle. Oh, sorry, one second. You can see him taking shots at Aristotle with some of the things that he's saying about the ways to think here. But he's doing it to get us right back to that Socratic thing that we spent so much time looking at. And in any event, it's an impressive thing. We still have to do justice. I mean, we've done so much Plato that that horrible excerpt that they had here didn't do it justice. So we'll have to do justice to Aristotle, and we will in year 2. But yeah, I'm glad you're liking this. This is a wild ride. So let's continue. In short, everything seems to be present in the wax that was required for me to know. But as I speak, I move it towards the fire. Its color and its shape, its bigger, its size, it melts, it heats, its taste, everything changes. What was in the wax that allowed me intellectually to identify it as a thing that is the same thing if all of the things through the senses have now been changed? Perhaps what I distinctly knew was neither the sweetness of honey, nor the fragrance of flowers, nor a sound, but a physical object which once appeared to me one way and now appears differently. But what exactly is it of which I now have a one way and now appears differently? I'm sorry, which I now have a mental image. Okay, so he's saying the thingness of it seemed to be perceived by me. Hold on, we'll fix this. The thingness of it, right? We're doing our a priori section on Tuesdays, which is kind of cool. And we'll probably come back to Descartes in that. But the thingness of it is seems to be perceived by me. Remember, he's not affirming things. He doesn't even think there's a physical world yet. But what he's just doing is examining his mental notions of these concepts that he distinctly thinks he's perceiving. He doesn't think that he is right to say that I am perceiving a thing, but he's saying I know for sure that of the things that are happening in my mind that seem like perceptions of a thing are of this nature, but all of the ones that seem sensory could change, and yet I still have this direct notion of the thing itself. I didn't get that through my senses, by the way, because all the senses changed. Where did I get that? And what does it mean about the thing? So we won't jump the gun because he's not going to affirm things until he's ready. Let's pay careful attention. Remove everything that doesn't belong to the wax and see what's left. Nothing is left except an extended, flexible, and changeable thing. But what is it for this thing to be flexible and changeable? Is it just that the wax can go from round to square and then to triangular as I have mentally pictured? Of course not. Since I understand that the wax's shape can change in innumerable ways, and since I can't run through all the changes in my imagination, my comprehension of the wax's flexibility and changeability cannot have been produced by my ability to have mental images. And what about the thing that is extended? Are we also ignorant of its extension? Since the extension of the wax increases when the wax melts, increases again when the wax boils, and increases still more when the wax gets hotter. I will be mistaken about what the wax is unless I believe that it can undergo more changes in extension than I can ever encompass with mental images. Don't jump the gun. He hasn't affirmed that there's a solid body out there yet. right? He's saying, whatever this thing is that I seem to be perceiving, it's not invented solely by me because there's too many things it can go through. I can't encompass it. I'm limited, right? When he, this is kind of important actually. We might highlight this because it's sort of coming out here as necessary for the argument he's making. When he said, I exist as a deceived thing or a deceivable thing, he knows more about himself than just that he exists with thoughts. He exists as not God, right? He knows that he exists without total knowledge. He knows that he exists as a thing that can be deceived, right? All he has to do is remember that he's had experiences where he thought something was true and it turned out not to be. Well, that's the basis of his whole method. I could be dreaming right now. This might not be real, right? I've had those experiences before. At least I think I have. Maybe my memories were just downloaded to me last minute and I didn't exist at all before then, right? But whatever it is, if that's the case, if you have to go that far for me to not believe in something and not affirm it, which I don't want to do because I don't want to be deceived, well, then I'm not God. I'm not unlimited. I'm a thing that can be deceived. So I exist as a deceivable thing. Therefore, therefore I am. Right. That's kind of key, or else this paragraph wouldn't make sense here. Okay. So since I understand that the wax's shape can change in innumerable ways, I'm not infinite. I know it's these things can change, but I can't be the source. My mental images, at least, can't be the source of my perceptions of this thing. And what about the thing that is extended? Okay, that's also infinite in gradations. I can't be the source of that. Um, unless it can undergo more changes in extension than I can ever encompass with mental images, I must therefore admit that I do not have an image of what the wax is. I grasp what it is with only my mind. Okay. If this is a real physical thing, I don't understand it. I can't wrap my mind around it because it can undergo infinite changes. And I'm not an infinite being. I'm not the sort of thing that can't be deceived. While I am saying this about a particular piece of wax, it is even more clearly true about wax in general. What then is this piece of wax that I grasp only with my mind? What is it that I'm understanding? It is something that I see, feel, and mentally picture. Exactly what I believed it to be at the outset. But it must be noted that despite the appearances, my grasp of the wax is not visual, tactile, or pictorial. Rather, my grasp of the wax is the result of a purely mental inspection, which can be imperfect and confused, as it was once, or clear and distinct, as it is now, depending on how much attention I pay to the things of which the wax consists. Okay, we'll pause for a quick second. Descartes has a distinction between imperfect and confused ideas and clear and distinct ideas, right? He still doesn't know that there's fucking wax. He doesn't know that there's a physical object yet. He's just examining the notions he has of it. And he says, "Oh, I used to think that this thing was based in senses, but I know it's not now. Now it's more of a Socratic idea. It's more of a the thing in itself is what I know to be there, even though I'm not perceiving it through the senses. I see that clearly and distinctly now that my notion might be confused. There might not be wax, but my notion of it is of thingness. It's of a thing external to myself. I don't know that there are such things, but I know that that's the notion. I'm surprised by how prone my mind is to error. Even when I think to myself non-verbally, language stands in my way. The common usage comes close to deceiving me. For when the wax is present, we say that we see the wax itself, not that we infer its presence from its color and shape. I'm inclined to leap from this fact about language to the conclusion that I learn about the wax by eyesight rather than by purely mental inspection. Right? He's going into that idealism realm. He's not going to stay there, but he's going there. But or he might not stay there. Let's see. But if I happen to look out my window and see men walking in the street, I naturally say that I see men, just as I say that I see the wax. What do I really see, however, but hats and coats that could be covering robots? I judge that they are men. Thus, I comprehend with my judgment, which is in my mind, objects that I once believed myself to see with my eyes. Another way is I've got an idea. That's what I know right now is I've got ideas of things. One who aspires to wisdom. Now, okay, so his clear and distinct ideas is actually a little different than what I just said. He has clear and distinct ideas of objects. That doesn't mean they're real yet. He's going to find a way to doubt them still, right? He could be constantly deceived. But he now knows that what he's being deceived about is of the quality of a thing that is a mental, he's grasping it mentally. It's not through the senses. One who aspires to wisdom above that of the common man disgraces himself by deriving doubt from common ways of speaking. Let's go on, then, to ask when I most clearly and perfectly grasped what the wax is. Was it when I first looked at the wax and believed my knowledge to come from the external senses, or at any rate from the so called common sense, the power of having mental images? Well, he's calling it into question. Or is it now, after I have carefully studied what the wax is and how I come to know it? Doubt would be silly here. For what was distinct in my original conception of the wax? How did that conception differ from that had by animals? When I distinguish the wax from its external forms, when I undress it and view it naked, there may still be errors in my judgments about it, but I couldn't possibly grasp the wax in this way without a human mind. That's all he's proving. Okay. He's proving to himself that he's the sort of thinking thing that could be deceived about everything. And his very perceptions of things are based in something mental. They're not a direct experience of the thing itself. And he's going to keep doing this. He's going to keep going back and forth in paragraphs. It's a meditation and it's a mysticism thing. It's supposed to lead us one way and then slam us in the other direction and then slam us back. And by doing so, get rid of all the clutter on our shelves until we can see clearly or have an experience or something. All right. What should I say about this mind? Or, in other words, about myself? I am not now admitting that there is anything to me but a mind. That's all I'll admit so far. What is this I that seems to grasp the wax so distinctly? Now he's going to ask about that. Don't I know myself much more truly and certainly, and also much more distinctly and plainly than I know the wax? For if I base my judgment that the wax exists on the fact that I see it, my seeing it much more obviously implies that I exist. It's possible that what I see is not really wax, and it's even possible that I don't have eyes with which to see. But it clearly is not possible that when I see, or what now amounts to the same thing when I think I see, the I, which thinks, is not a real thing. That you can't doubt. That's all he's proving. So he's really careful about this. Similarly, if I base my judgment that the wax exists on the fact that I feel it, the same fact makes it obvious that I exist. But if I base, so he's saying either way, if you want to say that you're experiencing it, you're more real than the thing. If you want to recognize that it's possible you've been a brain in a vat or a program in the matrix and that you've never had eyes and you've never seen anything except data has been fed into your little processing thing. If you want to recognize that that's a possibility, like I am, well, then clearly you can doubt that the thing exists. You can even doubt that you've seen it, but you can't doubt that you've seen it. Right? You haven't seen it, but the experience of seeing it means you're a thinking thing. You're a human mind sans the body, sans everything else that we mean by human. You have the kind of mind that could be deceived in that way. And now he's going to build everything off of that because he says, I can't doubt that. Okay. Similarly, if I base my judgment of the wax, I feel it. If I base my judgment, other thing is obviously be said. And what I've said about the wax applies to everything else that is outside me. Moreover, if I seem to grasp the wax more distinctly when I detect it with several senses than when I detect it with just sight or touch, I must know myself even more distinctly. For every consideration that contributes to my grasp of the piece of wax or to my grasp of any other physical object serves better to reveal the nature of my mind, because the mind has so much in it by which it can make its conception of itself distinct that what comes to it from physical objects hardly seems to matter. And now I have brought myself back to where I wanted to be. I now know that physical objects are grasped not by the senses or the power of having mental images, but by understanding alone. We're hearing echoes of Plato again, aren't we? Right? We'll talk more about Descartes in the context of all of it, and we'll debate it all in year two. But there's a war between the Aristotelian and the Platonic here, and we might have our second Socrates or our next Socrates in a sense. Okay, and not that he's the same as Socrates, you know what I mean. Consummate thinker. Okay, and since I grasp physical objects in virtue of their being understandable, rather than in virtue of their being tangible or visible, I know that I can't grasp anything more easily or plainly than my mind. But since it takes time to break old habits of thought, I should pause here to allow the length of my contemplation to impress the new thoughts more deeply into my memory. It's hypnotic. He's if you follow him on his journey, you will get back to a real world at the end. It's actually probably dangerous to do it too seriously just with an excerpt here, but here we go. What he wants to do is impress upon your mind that nothing is real in a way that your mind can't get out of. It's a rough thing to get into. It's possible to get there. He's trying to induce it in us. We won't read it that carefully though. On the existence of material objects and the real distinction of mind from body, it remains for me to examine whether material objects exist. He still hasn't shown that yet. Okay, insofar as they are the subject of pure mathematics. I now know at least that they can exist because I grasp them clearly and distinctly. So it's possible they do actually exist. For God can undoubtedly, okay, so this is a cool argument. God can undoubtedly, even if he's an all deceiving God who's got me locked in a matrix, he's powerful enough in either case to make whatever I can grasp in this way. And I never judge that something is impossible for him to make unless there would be a contradiction in my grasping the thing distinctly. Also, the fact that I find myself having mental images when I turn my attention to physical objects seems to imply that these objects really do exist. For when I pay careful attention to what it is to have a mental image, it seems to me that it's just the application of my power of thought to a certain body which is immediately present to it and which must therefore exist. What's he affirming exists? The mental understanding of the object. I clearly, distinctly perceive that. He doesn't know that the physical object external to himself yet exists, though. But he knows that otherness as a concept exists. He knows that there must be something other than himself for him to have that notion, right? He knows that he's not everything. He knows he can be deceived. So, re, I shouldn't say reading between the lines, pulling out part of what's happening in this argument here is that he's saying there must be something other than just my mind. Maybe it's a God that deceives me about everything. I don't know much, but there's otherness at least. To clarify this, I'll examine the difference between having a mental image and having a pure understanding. Well, all right. So, and earlier when he said, well, I won't say that God can't make the world exactly as I perceive it. He could, unless I can't perceive it distinctly, right? He can't make a square circle, right? God can't make things that I can't even have a concept of because they're impossible and self contradictory. Maybe he can, maybe he can't. I don't know. But I do know that if he's capable of creating the clear and distinct perception of something in my mind, he's also powerful enough to just make the damn thing, right? He could just make it and make it possible for me to perceive it if he can actually just make me perceive it without there being a thing. That would be harder. Okay, we'll get back to that later. To clarify this, I'll examine the difference between having a mental image and having a pure understanding. When I have a mental image of a triangle, for example, I don't just understand that it is a figure bounded by three lines. I also look at the lines as though they were present to my mind's eye. And this is what I call having a mental image. When I want to think of a Chiliagon, I understand that it is a figure with 1,000 sides as well as I understand that a triangle is a figure with three, but I can't imagine its sides or look at them as though they were present. Being accustomed to using images when I think about physical objects, I may confusedly picture some figure to myself. But this figure obviously is not a chiliagon, for it in no way differs from what I present to myself when thinking about a myriagon or any other many sided figure. And it doesn't help me to discern the properties that distinguish chiliagons from other polygons. If it's a pentagon that is in question, I can understand its shape as I can that of a chiliagon without the aid of mental images. But I can also get a mental image of the pentagon by directing in my mind's eye to its five lines of the air and the area that they bound. And it's obvious to me that getting this mental image requires a special mental effort different from that needed for understanding. A special effort which clearly reveals the difference between having a mental image and having a pure understanding. Cool. I have I have things I have a pure understanding that's even based in a clear and distinct perception of objects outside myself. I don't know that they exist yet, but I know that that notion is something my mind can do. I also understand that my mind can have that understanding and it can create mental images of things. But it can have understanding of things that it can't create mental images of, right? I can understand that a chiliagon is a thousand-sided regular polygon and that a pentagon is a five-sided regular polygon. I can make a mental image of the polygon. I can't make a mental image of the chiliagon. I can picture something that's kind of like a rough circle everywhere, but I don't see the 1,000 lines. They're not really it could have a million lines, it could have 200 lines, it could have 20 lines. I don't know. It's just a many-sided thing. I don't really have a I can't encompass it, but I can still have an understanding. Right? I could imagine a chiliagon and understanding that it's there. So he knows that he as a thinking thing that can be deceived exists. That's all he knows. But he's starting to see, "Hey, there's different faculties in my thinking. I can do different things. I don't know that I'm sensing things, but I know that I can have sensory experiences. I don't know that there's an object for me to distinctly perceive apart from the senses, but I know that I can have the understanding clearly and distinctly of otherness, of objectness." Okay? He's really going slowly here. He's not jumping the gun and saying, "Oh, well, then therefore there must be objects." He's really just saying, "What do I know in this matrix where I could be utterly deceived by an evil god? What do I know for sure that even he couldn't deceive me about?" Well, he can't convince me that I'm not a thinking thing because whenever he tries to deceive me about that and I try to doubt it, I have to doubt to do it. And doubting is a thinking thing. So I, as a deceivable thing, exist. I, as a thinking thing, exist. That's all I know. Well, what is this thinking? It's got some parts. It also seems to me that my power of having mental images, being distinct from my power of understanding, is not essential to myself, or in other words, to my mind. For if I were to lose this ability, I would surely remain the same thing that I now am. And it seems to follow that this ability depends on something distinct from me. That's where I was hinting that he must have been getting to from earlier, right? That was implicit in 2 paragraphs ago. And it's very much a Socratic way of thinking here. It's impressive. What he's saying is, if all there was just my mind, if all there was just that, if I was the only mind and I live in an ideal world, it's all just ideas and I'm a madman dreaming and that's it. Where the hell did I get the notion of otherness? Where did it come from? It must be that there's something other than me if I have notions of otherness. And we won't go into the Socratic way of thinking about that right now because it's too far afield, but you can see he's thinking in that same way. Okay. And it seems to follow that this ability depends on something distinct from me. If we suppose that there is a body so associated with my mind that the mind can look into it at will, it's easy to understand how my mind might get mental images of physical objects by means of my body. If there were such a body, the mode of thinking that we call imagination would only differ from pure understanding in one way. When the mind understood something, it would turn inward and view an idea that it found in itself. But when it had mental images, it would turn to the body. and look at something there which resembled an idea that it had understood by itself or had grasped by sense. Okay, that otherness could be his body. It could be that he has a mind and a body. There's where you get the otherness. He's not affirming that there's other bodies or other minds or anything else, right? He's not going to affirm anything until he knows for sure it's the case. But the notion of otherness means the mental part of me must be able to look at something other than the mental. It has to be able to do that, or it wouldn't have the ability to come up with the imagination of a thing outside itself. We wouldn't get that from anywhere. Okay, but that other thing could be my body, right? I could be dualistic, right? I could be uh, bipartite. Okay, here we go, Descartes. We're gonna go nice and slowly. He's gonna be careful the whole time. All right. If there were such a body, blah, 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 blah. When the mind understood something, it would turn inward. When it had mental images, it would be looking at the body part of itself, even if that's all there is. As I've said, then, it's easy to see how I get mental images if we suppose that my body exists. And since I don't have my in mind any other equally plausible explanation of my ability to have mental images, I conjecture, it's not affirming, I conjecture that physical objects probably do exist. He's not going to affirm that they exist yet. All right. He's actually making a really strong argument for why there must be physical bodies, his body, other bodies, something. There must be physical bodies, something external to this mind. He's making a really strong argument for that. And then he says, I'm going to go so far as to conjecture that it's probably true, but he's going to find a way to doubt it still. But this conjecture is only probable. Despite my careful and thorough investigation, the distinct idea of bodily nature that I get from mental images does not seem to have anything in it from which the conclusion that physical objects exist validly follows. He tried. He tried to look at his ideas of objects and say, is there something in them that has to make them real? He says, there's a lot in there. There's something in there that makes them highly probable that there's some physical something besides just my mind, but just probable. There's nothing in it that makes it a necessity or a certainty, so I'm not going to affirm it yet. Besides having a mental image of the bodily nature, which is the subject matter of pure mathematics, I have mental images of things which are not so distinct. Things like colors, sounds, flavors, and pains. But I seem to grasp these things better by sense, from which they seem to come, with the aid of memory, to the understanding. Thus, to deal with these things more fully, I must examine the senses and see whether there is anything in the mode of awareness that I call sensation from which I can draw a conclusive argument for the existence of physical objects. He tried to get out of the idealistic trap just mentally and couldn't do it. Now he's going to try empirically to see is there something about the quality of these sensory experiences that proves to me there's something external to myself. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. First, I'll remind myself of the things that I believed really to be as I perceived them on the grounds for my belief. Next, I'll set out the grounds on which I later called this belief into doubt. And finally, I'll consider what I ought to think now. To begin with, I sensed that I had a head, hands, feet, and other members that make up a human body. I viewed this body as part, or maybe even as all of me. I sensed that it was influenced by other physical objects whose effects could be either beneficial or harmful. I judged these effects to be beneficial to the extent that I felt pleasant sensations and harmful to the extent that I felt pain. And in addition to sensations of pain and pleasure, I sensed hunger, thirst, and other such desires, and also bodily inclinations towards cheerfulness, sadness, and other emotions. Outside me, I sensed not just extension, shape, and motion, but also hardness, hotness, and other qualities detected by touch. I also sensed light, color, odor, taste, and sound, qualities by whose variation I distinguished such things as the sky, the earth, the sea from one another. In view of these ideas of qualities, which presented themselves to my thought and were all that I really sensed directly, I had some reason for believing that I sensed objects distinct from my thought, not just made up and dreamed by me. I had some reason for thinking I was sensing real things, physical objects from which the ideas came. For I found that these ideas came to me independently of my desires, so that however much I tried, I couldn't sense an object when it wasn't present to an organ of sense, or fail to sense one when it was present, right? So he's starting to say, well, yeah, it seems like these things really exist. I mean, if I'm just dreaming them up, why can't I conjure a beautiful naked woman next to me right now or a piece of chocolate cake on a plate? I can't sense that in front of me, even if I really would like it. Or if I touch a hot stove and I burn myself and I'm blistering, why can't I just erase that from happening if it was all just in my mind? So he's saying there's some good reason to think there's a real world here. It's not just made up by me. And since the ideas that I grasped by sense were much livelier, more explicit, and in their own way more distinct than those I deliberately created or found impressed in my memory, it seemed that these ideas could not have come from me, and thus that they came from something else, having no conception of these things other than that suggested by my sensory ideas. I could only think that the things resembled the ideas. Indeed, I couldn't I in other words, I could only think that. I couldn't even, get out of thinking that. Indeed, since I remembered using my senses before my reason, since I found the ideas that I created in myself to be less explicit than those grasped by sense, and since I found the ideas that I created to be composed largely of those that I had grasped by sense, I easily convinced myself that I didn't understand anything at all unless I had first sensed it. I also had some reason for supposing that a certain physical object, which I viewed as belonging to me in a special way, was related to me more closely than any other. I couldn't be separated from it as I could from other physical objects. I felt all of my emotions and desires in it, and because of it, and I was aware of pains and pleasant feelings in it, but in nothing else. I didn't know why sadness goes with the sensation of pain or why joy goes with sensory stimulation. I didn't know why the stomach twitches when I call hunger twitches that I call hunger warn me that I need to eat, or why dryness in my throat warns me that I need to drink. Seeing no connection between stomach twitchings and the desire to eat, or between the sensation of pain producing thing and the consequent awareness of sadness, I could only say that I had been taught the connection by nature. These were my assumptions. This is just how it is. And nature seems also to have taught me everything else that I knew about the objects of sensation. For I convinced myself that the sensations came to me in a certain way before having found grounds on which to prove that they did. But since then, so that's a pretty fun argument. It's a pretty good one. He says, but since then, many experiences have shaken my faith in the senses. Towers that seemed round from a distance sometimes looked square close up, and huge statues on pediments sometimes didn't look big when seen from the ground. In innumerable such cases, I found the judgments of the external senses to be wrong, and the same holds for the internal senses. What is felt more inwardly than pain? Yet I had heard that people with amputated arms and legs sometimes seem to feel pain in the missing limb. And it therefore didn't seem didn't seem perfectly certain to me that the limb in which I felt a pain is always the one that hurts, right? Oh, how can I doubt the real world? Well, prick your finger with a thing. Owie, 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 owie. Descartes goes, you don't need a body for that, right? Here's a guy who doesn't have a finger. He sometimes goes, owie, 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 my finger. He doesn't even have a finger. How do you know you're sensing anything? You're having an experience like he is, but it's not perfectly clear that there's any connection between the body and the mind there, your perception of the body, if it even exists. And to these grounds for doubt, I've recently added two that are very general. He's adding more doubts. First, since I didn't believe myself to sense anything while awake, that I couldn't also take myself to sense in a dream. And since I didn't believe that what I sense in sleep comes from objects outside of me, I didn't see why I should believe what I sense while awake comes from such objects. Since, second, since I didn't yet know my creator, or rather, since I supposed that I didn't know him, I saw nothing to rule out my having been so designed by nature that I'm deceived even in what seems most obviously true to me. Remember, he's posited 2 plus 3 have to be 5, right? Nope. There might be an all powerful demon who created the world instead of God. There might be a malevolent deity. He might have made me get that wrong every time I did it. It's obviously 2 and 3 make 6, but every time I try to add 2 and 3, I get 5 because he makes me get it wrong the same way every time. I don't even know that 2 and 3 make 5. Likewise, even though it seems like my sensory experiences are of things outside myself, I don't think that that's true when I'm dreaming, and yet I'm having those same sensations. And beyond that, my entire waking life could be like a dream with an all powerful deceiver. I'm in the matrix, baby. I'm in the fucking matrix, and I'm not even a body plugged into it. I'm just a program inside of a program. And God wrote it for me to have these experiences or think that I have them, but I'm deceived about everything all the time. It's possible. He doesn't think it's true. He's not affirming that that's the case. He's saying, since it could be the case, I won't affirm yet that I have a body. I need to know it more certainly before I affirm it. And this is how well he can doubt things. Okay. I saw nothing to rule out my having been so designed by nature that I'm deceived even in what seems most obviously true to me. I could easily refute the reasoning by which I convinced myself of the reality of sensible things, since my nature seemed to impel me towards many things which my reason rejected. I didn't believe that I ought to have much faith in nature's teachings. And while my will didn't control my sense perceptions, I didn't believe it to follow that these perceptions came from outside me, since I thought that the ability to produce these ideas might be in me without my being aware of it. Right? He's aware of a subconscious. He's aware of an unconscious. He's aware of the possibility that you don't know everything your mind is doing, and perhaps there's parts of your mind you're not aware of that are making the painful experiences for you to have. Doesn't mean you have a body that's experiencing pain. We're just highlighting things that show that Socrates and Thomas Aquinas and Descartes, they didn't have to wait around for Kant to come up with the a priori. They didn't have to wait around for current thinkers today to come up with the idea that nature evolved us not to perceive the truth, but to have a user interface to reality. Descartes talking about that. And he's saying that could be the case. How do I know that's not the case? Let's just keep following it through until we can find a way out if we can, or we can just say, the only thing I'm certain of is that nothing is certain, right? He doesn't know where he's going to end up yet. But these aren't new ideas, right? If there was a time machine, us clever theorists today wouldn't be bringing up things that would Descartes would be like, I hadn't considered that before. Oh my gosh, he's got it. He's totally on the same page. Okay. now, Now that I've begun to know myself and my creator better, I still believe that I oughtn't blindly to accept everything that I seem to get from my senses, yet I no longer believe that I ought to call it all into doubt. Here's why. In the first place, I know that everything that I clearly and distinctly understand can be made by God to be exactly as I understand it. The fact that I can clearly and distinctly understand one thing apart from another is therefore enough to make me certain that it is distinct from the other, since the things could be separated by God, if not by something else. I judge the things to be distinct, regardless of the power needed to make them exist separately. We're not going to continue taking this apart. It's pretty cool, though, right? Accordingly, from the fact that I have gained knowledge of my existence without noticing anything about my nature or essence except that I am a thinking thing, I cannot rightly conclude that my essence consists solely in the fact that I am a thinking thing. Right? So again, he's being very careful here. He's not saying I know there's a deceiving God. He's not saying I know I don't have a body. He's saying, look, I can perceive myself just as a brain in a vat or a program in the matrix. I can think of it. All I know for sure is that I'm the sort of thing that can be deceived. I'm the sort of thing that can think itself to have or that can have perceptions thinking that they're based in sensory experiences. I'm the sort of thing that can have distinct notions of thingness and otherness, even if there is no such thing. That's all I know so far. But that doesn't mean that there aren't bodies. That doesn't mean that I don't have those things. Right? I have no reason to affirm that I am just a mind in the matrix and that nothing else is real. I just don't know that it's true yet. Right? So he's not making the silly mistake as some people the first time they read it, they think that's what he's saying. He's not saying I know that the opposite is true. He's just saying I'm only going to affirm things I know for sure that they're true. It's possible, or as I will say later, it's certain. Okay, he hasn't proven yet, but certain, he will prove later, that I have a body, which is very tightly bound to me. But on the one hand, I have a clear and distinct idea of myself insofar as I am just a thinking and extended thing. And on the other hand, I have a distinct idea of my body insofar as it is just an extended and unthinking thing, right? Body and mind. That was the mind body problem that we spent so much time on earlier that we'll be coming back to again a lot, right? This the philosophy of mind course here. But Descartes is saying, I know for sure there's something mental in the universe, and I'm strongly inclined to think it's highly probable that there's an unthinking physicalness in the universe too. He hasn't yet affirmed it, but he's got lots of good reasons for thinking it's the case, but he won't affirm it until he knows for sure. It's possible. Or, as I will say later, it's certain that I have a body, which is very tightly bound to me. But on the one hand, I have a clear and distinctive idea of myself insofar as I'm just a thinking and unextended thing. And on the other hand, I have a distinct idea of my body insofar as it is just an extended and unthinking thing. It's certain then that I am really distinct from my body and can exist without it. I can separate the ideas. I don't need a body to be. These are two totally different ideas. That's all he's proving so far. He's not saying anything else. Okay. In addition, I find in myself abilities for special modes of awareness, like the abilities to have mental images and to sense. I can clearly and distinctly conceive of my whole self as something that lacks these abilities, but I can't conceive of my abilities existing without me or without an understanding substance to which they reside. Since the conception of these abilities includes the conception of something that understands, I see that these abilities are distinct from me in the way that a thing's properties are distinct from the thing itself. I realize other abilities in me. All right, we're not going to underline it all. He's really making a lot. If the Aristotelians were making distinctions, he's making a lot of distinctions here. Maybe different kind, but he's making a lot of distinctions. Okay. I recognize other abilities in me, like the ability to move around and to assume various postures. These abilities can't be understood as to exist apart from a substance in which they reside any more than the abilities to imagine and sense, and they therefore cannot exist without such a substance. But it's obvious that if these abilities do exist, the substance in which they reside must be a body or extended substance rather than an understanding one. For the clear and distinct conception of these abilities contain extension, but not understanding. Okay, we're going to keep repeating clear and distinct. Every time we do clear and distinct, consider that a hashtag that means not yet proven, but highly probable. It's not exactly what it means, but it's in that category for him, right? So he's saying, I know I'm a thinking thing that can be deceived. I have a clear and distinct notion of a physical body that I probably also have. And if I do, it's not anything like this thinking thing. It's totally different kind of a thing. I'm clearly and distinctly perceiving it as such, and I can clearly tell that there are two different things. He's not saying for sure it's real. There's a clear and distinct perception of this notion, and it's different. There's nothing common between them. So, this for real, this highly probable, but later will be certain. Okay. For the clear and distinct conception of the abilities contain extension, but not understanding. Okay. There is also in me, however, a passive ability to sense, to receive and recognize ideas of sensible things. But I wouldn't be able to put this ability to use if there weren't, either in me or in something else, an active power to produce or make sensory ideas. Could be the programming of the matrix, could be my own dreaming, could be real things that trigger my sensory experience. Who knows? But there's something. Since this active power doesn't presuppose understanding, and since it often produces ideas in me without my cooperation and even against my will, it cannot exist in me, not the me that's the thinking thing. Therefore, this power must exist in a substance distinct from me. And for reasons that I've noted, this substance must contain, either formally or eminently, all the reality that is contained subjectively in the ideas that the power produces. Either this substance is a physical object, a thing of bodily nature, which contains formally the reality of the ideas that the idea contains subjectively, or it is God or one of his creations, which is higher than a physical object, something which contains this reality eminently. But since God isn't a deceiver, it's completely obvious that he doesn't send these ideas to me directly or by means of a creation which contains their reality eminently rather than formally. For since he has not given me any ability to recognize that these ideas are sent by him or by creations other than physical objects, and since he has given me a strong inclination to believe that the ideas come from physical objects, I see no way to avoid the conclusion that he deceives me if the ideas are sent to me by anything other than the physical objects. It follows that physical objects exist. Okay, this must have skipped the part on the proof of God's existence. Okay, he's just taking excerpts here, so it's not going to totally hold together. There's going to be questions we have, but let's flush out the argument that he's making here. Imagine he did prove for sure that God exists, and imagine he proved that he knew for sure, just from knowing that he exists as a deceivable thing, that the thing he's calling God is all powerful, all knowing, and simple. It doesn't have length, breadth, and width, isn't like a body. Now, we haven't looked at his argument for why that's the case, but he proves that he exists, and with the same level of carefulness, he proves that God exists, and then he gets into this realm over here. So they skipped that part, but it's necessary for this. Remember, he says, "Now I have a better idea of God." Think about what that God is. It again, we haven't read that passage here. We got to read all of it. But let's just say that just as careful as he was about not affirming that he exists as anything but a thinking thing when it's put forward by him and only when it's put forward by him, but not as a thing that has a body, he's being very careful about it. He's also just as careful with the idea of proving that God exists. We'll just put that aside. But what he knows about God, what allows him to see that God exists, is that there is a thing that's all powerful, all knowing, and simple at the same time. Now, I'm not going to give you the argument right now. It's a really good argument. It's a really cool argument. But let's just say he did that. And now here's his argument that bodies exist. First of all, they highly probably exist. Here's all the reasons, clear and distinct, lots of reasons to think there are bodies, but I don't know that they exist because all of those things could be fed into me by a deceiving God who's just trying to make me believe that I live in a world with objects. And then he says, what was the nature of this God again? God could make a deceptive world that makes it seem like things exist, or he could just make the world exactly that way. And either one would be just as easy for him, and he's not afraid of anybody, so he has no reason to deceive anybody. What is there about a creature like that, or not a creature? What is there about an entity like that that would need to be deceiving me all the time? Is he challenged by me? Is he like scared? Does he want to keep us all like he's got it all, baby. He's got it all. There's no reason he's powerful enough to make the world look like it's real when it's not, and he's powerful enough to just as easily make the damn world and make it look exactly the way it looks because it actually looks that way. He could do either one and neither would be harder for him, and he has no motive to be deceptive. It's only when he adds that added bit, and again, we've skipped his argument for God's existence, but it's only when he adds that last little bit that he can actually say, now I'm sure. Now I'm sure there's no rational reason to believe because his doubt that there were physical objects was getting really, really small in a sense, right? He was sticking to it, but he's like, wait a minute, I'm clearly and directly perceiving this thing. I've taken away all of the misunderstandings of it. It's almost like the easiest explanation is that it's real, but I still don't know that it's real because I know I could be a brain in a vat. I know I could be this thing. I know that God could be deceiving me all the time. But, and we skip the part obviously in this excerpt where he proves God's existence, he actually proves it by his nature. Okay. So it's a direct encounter with the nature of God that lets him know what God is actually like, not in a whole bunch of details, not with a whole bunch of scripture verses smuggled in. He's doing it exactly as thoroughly and as carefully as he's doing this. In fact, Nietzsche said, so what most people like to do is they like to say, oh, Descartes, very clever with the I think therefore I am, but then he went off the rails with that God stuff. What Nietzsche said was, nope, it all follows. It all follows perfectly. His third meditation, where he proves the existence of God, necessarily follows. This is Nietzsche saying, I looked at the argument. Necessarily, he understands the nature of God if he was right about I think, therefore I am. And then Nietzsche found a way to question I think, therefore I am, but which Descartes thought was indubitable. But if you're thinking to yourself, how can you have an argument for God's existence as a brain in a vat that doesn't know even if your body exists? Nietzsche's evaluation of it was Descartes got it right. All of the moves make perfect sense. It's impossible that God doesn't exist, and it's impossible that he's not like the type of thing that would have no reason to deceive you, unless Descartes was wrong about the I think, therefore I am part. So if you're convinced by that part, Nietzsche thinks you should be convinced by the rest. We don't have any other time to talk about his argument for the existence of God right now. It's very Socratic, but it's also in this very methodical Cartesian style that you seem to be appreciating. We will get a chance to look at that. We will come back and do Descartes. We'll just put Descartes on hold because we only have the excerpt here to read, but we'll put it on hold and remember, okay, we're not going to let him fuck with our minds too much, but we are going to go back and we're going to see the full thing at some point. Okay. He's given me a strong inclination to believe that the ideas come from physical objects. I see no way to avoid the conclusion that he deceives me if the ideas are sent to me by anything other than by the physical objects. I can't help but think, this is what he said earlier, I can't help but think that my perception of the thing comes from the thing. I know that's not always true. I know sometimes I'm dreaming. I know that that's not always true. But when I clearly and distinctly perceive a thing, there's only two options. The only way that that is not because there is a thing I'm perceiving is if there's an all-powerful God who's got a reason to lie to me all the time. Well, he was too weak, incapable of making the world for real. He had to make a fake version. Like what? Those are the only two options. So he doesn't affirm that there are objects, but he goes so far in trying to get the objects that he says, okay, there have to be objects, or God is a constant liar. He's always lying and deceiving me because why? Because he's afraid, he's weak, he's not all powerful, he's not able to just make the damn world work the way he makes me think it works. Obviously, I'm wrong sometimes. My senses can't be relied upon, but I can rely on the idea that if I clearly and distinctly, if I get rid of illusions and I try really hard, that the notion of an object being the source of why I think it's there, he took the time to prove there is something external to this mind of mine, right? He took the time to prove all of these little things. I mean, we're not going to go into it again and go over it to make sure, but we will in year two. We're going to really go into this in greater depth, but he's really not making a lot of leaps. He's refusing to make leaps that other people didn't even realize were leaps. So I thought, wait, aren't we already at bodies here? He's like, no, there's 12 things we have to ask first because there's all sorts of ways to doubt this. But then he gets to the point where he's like, clearly, when I clearly and distinctly perceive an object, it is not possible that there isn't an object unless I am being deceived by an all powerful entity. That's the only way to doubt it. So those are the two options. God has reasons to lie. He's all powerful. So he can, because it's harder. Remember, for Descartes, it's harder to make up the ideas and understanding than it is to just make the damn object that I can faultily perceive. That's easy. I'm not grasping that as directly, right? That's even easier to do. So it would be easier even to make a world that isn't all deceptive. Okay. We won't focus on this more because I know part of what would make this paragraph more convincing is the stuff he skipped. I tried to do my best to just point at it. It's a promissory note. We will have a chance to treat Descartes more fairly in the future. Okay. I see no way to avoid the conclusion that objects exist. These objects may not exist exactly as I comprehend them by sense. In many ways, sensory comprehension is obscure and confused, but these objects must at least have in them everything that I clearly and distinctly understand them to have. Every general property within the scope of pure mathematics. Let's pause. What is he saying? Color, sound, sensation, touch, those things could be I'm dreaming, right? He had lots of reasons to doubt, right? But then he's saying, wait a minute, what about the perception? I can't doubt that I'm having the experience. So he's only basing it on the experience. He's not saying the bottle exists. He's saying, I'm having the experience of sensing something outside myself that's like these things. Where does the quality of that come from? Is it made up by me? Is it made up by God? Is it in the damn world? He's taking all of the options. He proves it's something external to himself. And then he says it's either a deceptive God or the damn thing exists. There's something, all right. In other words, what you could say is maybe I'm dreaming this bottle, and maybe I'm dreaming the blue label, and maybe I'm in my bed naked right now and I'm not looking at anything blue. But blueness exists, the experience of blueness exists, and that didn't come from me. There must be something blue. That's all he's proving, right? He's not saying I'm proving for sure this body exists here. He's saying there must be external bodies that have the properties that can induce within me those experiences, or there is a God who could have easily made that world, but chose instead for some reason to make a totally deceptive world all the time. Those are my two options. And because we looked at the nature of God, what reason, what rationality is there behind saying a God that can do anything just as easily make the world, make it work the way it seems to me, would choose instead to make it all deceptive? Pause. Mark, go ahead.
How we doing? So,
Doing
so
good,
what?
baby. Good to see you.
Good. So, what would he say in reply to someone who said, "Well, maybe it all is a dream, or maybe it's a dream within a dream, but how do you know your brain can't conjure up things that don't exist? Maybe there is no color blue, and maybe your brain's creating it."
Okay. He asked that question. He said it could come from me, but then he proved that it couldn't come from him. So we can go back to that. Um, this is very much borrowing from the Socratic way of thinking, right? So it's funny because some people call Descartes a rationalist. He's clearly an empiricist and a rationalist. He's a consummate thinker. That's what we call him in our second year course. But Socrates even said, everything you know is from experience. Well, wait a minute. Socrates, you're a goddamn idealist, right? You think that the ideas are more real than the shadows of things that you're interacting with. But he goes, well, yeah, that's how I know I've interacted with God. I've had relational experience of the divine because I know it exists. And I can only know it if I've had relationship. I die and I go interact with all the forms of all the absolutes and all the true, like that oneness with God. That's where I get that type of knowledge. Descartes actually doing the same thing, but he's sticking to just one notion, which is the idea of God itself himself. Um, Okay, so let's go back to the question of could the guy just be dreaming? And remember, Descartes' no dummy. He says, maybe I have faculties I'm unaware of. Maybe my subconscious is making up the pain experience and then forcing me to have it or something. Right? He understands your question perfectly. Let's go back and find out how it was he crossed that off of possibilities. Whew, this is easier when we start at the beginning and go straight through it all, but it's a wild ride, isn't it? We're just reading a tiny excerpt of Descartes cut and pasted, and it's like a roller coaster. All right, let's see here. He made this argument just a page ago. And I could easily refute the reasoning by which I convinced myself of the reality of sensible things. Oh no, hold on. Oh, okay, yes. So this is his argument. I don't know how convincing this is. My nature seemed to impel me towards many things which my reason rejected. I didn't believe that I ought to have much faith in nature's teachings. And while my will didn't control my sense perceptions, I didn't believe it to follow that these perceptions came from outside me, since I thought that the ability to produce these ideas might be in me without me being aware of it. That was your question, right? Now that I've begun to know myself and my creator better, I still believe that I oughtn't blindly to accept everything that I seem to get from the senses, yet I no longer believe that I ought to call it all into doubt. Okay, not all into doubt. The blueness, there must be something blue out there, is all he's going to prove in the next four paragraphs, right? Not that this specific blue bottle exists. In the first place, I know that everything that I clearly and distinctly understand can be made by God. Okay, this is the God part. The fact that I can clearly and distinctly understand one thing apart from another is therefore enough to make me certain that it is distinct from the other, since the things could be separated by God if not by anything else. And I judge the things to be distinct, regardless of the power needed to make them exist separately. Accordingly, from the fact that I have gained knowledge of my existence without noticing anything about my nature or essence except that I am a thinking thing, I can rightly conclude that my essence consists solely in the fact that I am a thinking thing. It's possible, or as I will say later, it's certain that I have a body. Okay, this is it. This is his argument. Okay, Mark? I exist as a thinking thing that can be deceived. That's my essence. That's the only essence I can affirm right now. Maybe I have a body. Maybe it's tightly tied to me. Maybe it's intertwined, but I don't know that I do. But I know that this thinking thing, this mental experience realm, is of things that have qualities of blueness. Bodies have qualities of blueness. Bodies, not thinking things. Thinking things don't have those qualities. Thinking things don't have extension. Thinking things don't have location. He examined the essence of a thinking thing. He goes, it's like a massless dot somewhere that can be deceived. I mean, that's all I know of myself. That's all thinking requires, is that it can make judgments. It's not the sort of thing that you can hit with a baseball bat or weigh on a scale or detect the color in a spectrograph. It's not that kind of thing. Bodies are the sorts of things that have those qualities. Now, maybe all of my memories of experience of bodies were all just pumped into me through the matrix. Maybe God's deceiving me. That's still an option. But there isn't the option that that type of thing, a thinking thing, which is all I know myself to be, could be generating physical qualities unless physical qualities exist. Not that everything I think is physical exists, not that any specific thing I think is physical exists, but that there are bodies that have qualities of color and taste and sound and all of that stuff that I can perceive imperfectly through the senses that must be in the world somewhere. So we're going to have to pause for a second and just sort of expound upon how this argument works and the thinking behind it by going back really briefly, if you'll forgive me, to Plato's argument. Socrates' idea that you know things through experience. Okay. So here's the idea. If I asked you, Mark, to use your thinking, like your thinking quality of imagination, and I asked you to imagine a unicorn, you could probably do that, right? Unicorns don't exist, right? You can think of things that don't exist. How about I ask you to imagine a gold mountain, a mountain made of solid gold? You can imagine that. That doesn't mean that a mountain of gold exists. But now I would like you to imagine a mountain made of something immaterial. First, can you imagine a square circle?
I can
You can't
maybe
make a mental
imagine
image of a square circle. Can you imagine one though?
maybe a hybrid, but not a square circle itself.
So the term square circle is actually an absurdity. You can use the
Right.
word, but it doesn't mean anything even in your mind, let alone pointing at something that's real, right?
Right. At best, you could think of some sort of a hybrid of a square and a circle mixed together, but it wouldn't be either one or the other.
It wouldn't be
So
a square and it wouldn't be a circle. There's no
exactly.
such thing as a square circle, not even in your mind. You can put the words together, but you're babbling gibberish and nonsense. Your ideas in your mind don't actually need a word because there is no idea there for that word. That's just a stupid use of language. You've experienced or seen pictures of or heard tell of narwhals and rhinoceroses and horses. So you can take a horn and you can put it together with the horse, and you got the idea of a unicorn. You know that what gold is and you know what a mountain is, and so you can put the two ideas together. But if there's no such thing as metals, if there are no metals, how did you get the idea of metals at all? Your brain actually isn't the sort of thing that can just creatively make up stuff that isn't something it's experiencing. right? There's again, Socrates has that line, everything we know, it comes through experience. Descartes is a rationalist, but he also is basing his idea in this notion that the things that come to me have to come from somewhere. The quality of being a blue object is of a body. That's not what my thinking is. My thinking is thought and the essence of thinking. It's not a body. It can't be blue. It can't experience blueness. It can't experience it by looking in it itself. That's a thing only bodies can have. So the only options that are left is that I, as a thinking thing, can't make it up. So either an all powerful God is deceiving me about it, but there are no objects, or there just are objects that are blue. Maybe not this one, but there are some. There have to be somewhere in the universe, things like that. How else did I have the notion of it? It either came from a deceptive God that's pumping patterns into the back of my brain through the matrix, or it's coming to me from the fact that there are such things and I've experienced them at least once and now I'm in a dream maybe, right? He's not going to affirm more than he knows for sure, but he thinks it's not right to fully doubt that there are bodies with qualities. Just I could be dreaming for my whole life except for whatever part of my life had those experiences. And for Socrates, it's the afterlife. In the afterlife, he has experiences with the pure essence of things and then he comes into reality to be born, and when he's born, he just has to recollect what those things are so that he can make sense of the world because it's ever changing, as Hume said, which is why Hume lost connection with the world, right? But that's the basis of the Socratic and here the Cartesian argument. It sounds a little mystical and weird. We're not as familiar with the myth that Socrates is using, or that Plato is using, rather. But for Descartes, it's still based in exactly the same reasoning. The reasoning is somewhere I must have experienced an object of blueness because the only things that can have blueness are objects, bodies. I can sense them imperfectly. I can imagine I'm sensing them because I have sensed them sometime in the past. So this object might not be real, but the idea that there must be in the universe objects that have blueness is certain because I couldn't have made that up, or it's just shy of certain because God could be making it up. I could be in the matrix still. And then he has a different argument for getting rid of the idea that God's deceiving him, and he's left with the only option left. But the first one he takes away is the idea that I could make it up because my essence is just as a thinking thing. I'm not even a brain with neurons. I'm just thoughtness, uh, the ability to be deceived and nothing else. That's not blue. That's not hard. That's not in a location. That doesn't have length, breadth, and width. Where did I get these notions? I get them from experiencing things or from being deceived.
One
So
of
that would be his answer, at least. I'm trying to put on his hat to answer the question.
when you're
Once he's
talking,
done, oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was going to say when you're talking about it's only it would have to be things that you've experienced or you're being deceived, and it's like you can identify things because it's the opposite of what you've experienced, right? If he's saying I'm this finite being, then he can identify there must be this infinite God, right? He hasn't experienced that, but he's be able to identify what he is. He's able to identify what he isn't.
Right. So we might just have to read the entirety. I mean, it's too much for us to read tonight, but
Yeah.
Descartes doesn't think so.
Okay.
Descartes thinks that he can examine carefully the notion of the divine that he has in his mind and get rid of all of the mistakes he has about it until he's clearly and distinctly perceiving that notion and realize that that notion itself is of a quality that he could not have made up. He isn't like that, and so it's just like he could make up a unicorn if he's perceived or had reason to have sensory experiences, even if they're just the perceptions and not actually of things, of horned creatures and horses. So he can make up a unicorn, but he can't make up this thing that is unlimited, boundless, all powerful, and yet simple and not even in a location, just godness. He can't make that up because everything, even if he's been deceived about all his experiences in the world, they're all of something that is not of that quality. And he knows himself not to be of that quality because he knows he's been wrong before. So he knows he's deceivable. So that takes out the idea that he could extrapolate it or negate negate limitation or something to get to the notion. Now, we'll have to read that meditation. He does it in like 23 steps, so he's very careful about it. And you might be unconvinced at the end. And that's a pretty typical response. But come on, man, you're extrapolating, right? Here's a circle. Here's a more perfect circle. There's perfect circleness over there. You're just drawing a line that direction. Well, Socrates was thinking, he said, no, you can't do that. You won't know which direction to go. You won't know which direction to go unless you've experienced the perfect circle, the form of the circle in the afterlife or whatever myth he makes up for it, right? He doesn't think you can extrapolate it from your experiences in the world because nothing in the world is like that. There is no perfect circle. You've never experienced a circle at all. Circles are made up of points, and points have no length, breadth, or width. They're just a series of points, that's locations equidistant from a singular point. That you've never experienced a circle, and yet you have the idea of a circle. So again, Socrates is doing it with the idea of circle and all sorts of other things. Descartes is only doing it with the idea of an infinite and simple thing. Uh, how you can be all powerful, all knowing, and simple at the same time. Now, again, he actually finds that idea. So it's not that he can make up the idea. So this actually is important. So he's not saying I can use the word square circle and I can make up an idea and talk about the idea. He's actually encountering the idea, right? So what Descartes' argument is based on is that he is having a direct encounter with the quality of the idea of God, and the quality of the idea of God is qualitatively different from what he knows himself to be and everything else, that the only way he could have the idea of God is if there is something like that, that left its fingerprint on him, that made him to be the sort of thing to know that he's there or that he could relate to or something. That's the only option left him. Now, it's a 23-point argument, and it's obviously been skipped in this excerpt. And there's plenty of ways to quarrel with it. And your way is a pretty common way of quarreling with it, right? But Nietzsche said, no, 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 he got it right, which is pretty funny. He said, no, Descartes made no mistakes in those 23 points to get from, he's quite careful about it. Nietzsche judged it and said, no, you made no mistakes there. It's just the whole thinking, therefore I am part that I think is dubitable. That doesn't mean it's true. It's just, you know, Nietzsche didn't mock it, but most students of philosophy in their undergrad, they find reasons to think it's not as powerful as it perhaps is. It's a kind of an ontological argument. I'm not saying it's correct, right? But we're not reading it right now, so we can't do it justice. But let's at least highlight the fact that Socrates and Descartes both have this idea that I've thought carefully about the notions in my head, right? Look how careful Descartes is. He's like, well, I have perceptions of objects. No, I have the thought I'm perceiving objects, but I also have the quality of that experience. And that's something I couldn't be deceived of having, right? Like I might not be looking at a white wall, but the experience of seeing whiteness is happening in my brain, even if there is no wall, right? So Descartes being very careful about what he's going to affirm and what he's not going to affirm. And he doesn't stop doing that with this other argument. It doesn't mean he's right. It's just, it's a good argument to try to knock down and maybe eventually knock down. But all of the failed attempts to knock it down will start to show just how powerful it really is. It's a powerful argument, even if it isn't right in the final analysis or whatever. I'm not making a judgment either way on that. But it's based in this idea that Socrates has too, which is you don't have the right to a notion. And Descartes did this about the understanding of the otherness, of the objectness, right? Not I understand that this is an object, but the very understanding, it's weird. It's just the distinction, but the distinction of grasping the concept of the thing itself, even though that doesn't come to me through the senses, right? Where did I get that from? That must be what I'm using because look, the wax changed its color and its taste and its shape and its volume and every other quality, and yet I still have the notion of the thing. But that thing could change infinite ways, so I can't be the thing making it up, and I also can't fully wrap my head around it. So it's very highly probable there's something other than me in this world, unless, of course, God has built a matrix to write a program that's always deceived by things. It's like, okay, What kind of program did he write? What ideas are in that thing? And then Descartes is going to start there and go, okay, here's a weird one. uh, there's the first weird one he comes across that's awesome is I can doubt everything. I doubt, I doubt, I doubt, I doubt. Well, can you doubt the proposition that you are doubting right now? No, I can't do that without doubting. And so I have to affirm that I'm doubting. And if I'm doubting, I must exist as a thinking thing at least every time that I try to doubt that that's correct. That was his first powerful notion of an idea that he couldn't pry up. And then again, we've skipped it, but he comes across another notion. He goes, where the freaking heck did I get that idea? Even if I'm just lost in space as a blind, dark, bodiless thought machine that just keeps being deceived all the time, even when he does his sums, right? Descartes being real careful not to affirm things that most sane people would affirm. He even wrote that in a letter. He goes, I didn't do all of this so that we could prove things that only a crazy person would ever doubt. He said, I did it to show what we know most truly. And what we know most truly is that we and God exist. And then from that we can have more confidence and get back to a certainty of other things as well, but we know those two things first. Again, lots of ways to quarrel with it, but holy mackerel, I think that the compilers of all of this expected us to just get through it quickly and ignore a lot of it, but it's really worth the attention that we're giving to it. I think we're only about halfway through, so why don't we just stop and pause there for today? Is that okay, or are we going to get a bunch of boos and you want to keep going to see him rebuild the world fully?
No,
We,
that works. It's
yeah, we've been doing this an hour and 45 minutes, so this is just an excerpt, right? In year 2, we do the whole meditation. So at first, I was annoyed that they had a bad excerpt of Plato that didn't do him justice, and then the Aristotle one was good, but that's only because or it was good at least. Now the Descartes one is too much. It's too heavy. There's too much to get through, and I didn't want to go through it quickly because if you go through it too quickly and you don't pause to see exactly what moves he's making, you could think like, what's this guy going on about? You can get lost for a few paragraphs. This really is a meditation. You have to follow him, and he just sort of leads you this way, and then he slams you in the other direction, then he slams you over here again. And it's all to just shake things up. I mean, it's to do good philosophy, but it also has the effect of trying to induce. It's like a few other great philosophical texts that are hypnotic, right? I mean, Scott Adams, who we'd read as the 6th consummate thinker in our consummate thinkers course, which was fun. But he says, look, I had this book downloaded in my brain in the shower and I wrote it, and it's designed to hypnotize you. Or no, it's designed to induce within you an experience. It's not that I believe the arguments necessarily, but it's about rewiring the brain. He might have very different motivations than Descartes or whatever, but it's that kind of a work as well. And so we can't understand the philosophy of Descartes' arguments, and we can't understand the mysticism of what he's trying to accomplish unless we understand them both at the same time. And it's understanding the arguments that allow the mysticism thing to happen, the induction of an experience, which again, we're not going to be able to do justice to because these are excerpts. So we're going to have to do the whole thing like we do in year 2, or like we did last year in the Consummate Thinkers course when we got to it. But um, you can't do Descartes justice if you just read through the paragraphs quickly and skip over what exactly he's trying to prove and each step he's making. So we'll stop there. It's an hour and 47 minutes. I know you guys have a lot to say, and we're going to go into the unrecorded after conversation talk now. Sorry, it's kind of stupid to read excerpts of Descartes because it's sort of like getting hit with a couple of sledgehammers, and you kind of have to do the whole thing. But we can put a little promissory note and a little check mark and say, we'll just return to this someday. That's kind of cool. What he's up to is cool. Won't have to mess with our brains too much. We just know that we'll go back to it and we'll do it in year 2. But we will finish this excerpt the next time we get together. And then we only have one more excerpt of ancient or historical background stuff, and we'll be jumping right into behaviorism and doing the rest of this philosophy of mind course and getting into functionalism and all that other stuff that's all alive and being argued. I mean, all of this stuff is alive, obviously, and it's relevant, but the compilers didn't really think enough of it to give you more than just these excerpts. So we're going to follow the book. I know that the rest of the book is really, really good. We're just going to continue to push through this. historical background section that doesn't do justice to Socrates or Descartes or any of this stuff, because it's still alive for sure. There are Neoplatonists alive today. They think Plato got it right. There are Cartesians. This stuff is in the conversation. It's not just historical background, but whatever. I know the rest of the book to be good, so we'll just keep pushing through this in the next section, and then we'll be off to the races. Okay, let's end this.